So when I left off, we had just the basic frame for these drawer boxes done. This video is mostly going to be finishing these up. Drawers take a long time, wider drawers take even longer, and then drawers with finished fronts take even more time on top of that. So this is going to be a longer video. I apologize, I know it might not be the most interesting part of the build, but they do take a while to make. So you can see I have my three sides. I put a piece of blue tape on the bottom of all of them and label them. Realistically speaking, because I cut all these on the exact same jig, all these parts should be interchangeable, but at this point it's just easier to label them. I use the blue tape at the bottom because I have to cut a groove in the bottom for my inset panel for the base of them. And it's easiest when you're cutting, there's 8 drawers and I have 3 parts for each, so it's easiest when you're cutting that many pieces to have a label. So I have cut these on the wrong side before. It's not terrible, you can fill in the blank, but it's just easiest to do it right the first time around. So I have a 1/2 inch dado stack in my table saw, and the base on these I usually do 1/4 inch, but these drawers are so wide, they're going to be holding so much weight. You want them to be as stable as possible, so I went with 1/2 inch. So that's all I'm doing, about an inch or about 3/4 of an inch up from the bottom. I'm cutting that 1/2 inch dado groove in all of my pieces, and then I could go about and cut the backs and the bottoms. So you can see I did another test dado on all the pieces for the back so that I get that accurate. I found the one that fit perfectly, and then I could start cutting these. I could also cut the dado that's going on the back side for the backer. So you can see how I have these lined up. One of them is going to be sent, one of the sides will be sent through with blue tape forward, the other with blue tape facing back, and that will give me my groove on the proper sides of the 2 backs. Now the dovetail joint in the front is important because all of the pulling force when you're opening a drawer is on that front joint. The back side's not going to see as much stress, so that's why I don't bother making these 4-sided dovetail drawers. It's kind of overkill, so the back side just gets a basic dado, and that will be more than strong enough. So you can see I'm keeping the same height and everything in there, but obviously I changed the thickness because the backer's 3/4, and then that is what the 2 sides look like with all of the grooves. So I can go through and do that to all of the sides. I'm in my stack. This one's a little bit easier. Obviously you're not sending this side with the dovetails through facing the fence, so the tape's not as important. Once the drawers all together, you could see all of those joints. This will make a nice solid drawer that should hopefully last forever. And then on the bottom, this is really important, you could see the groove matches perfectly. The only problem you run into with this is if your front pieces are off a little bit, and sometimes with that dovetail jig it happens, and then your groove will be off. So that's why I spend so much time getting that jig perfect. I have this set into place, and I have it squared up, and that's how I'm going to measure for the backer. It's the easiest way to do it. You can see I have set in place, I have it squared up, and then I can measure between my 2 dado joints in the back for the backer. I can measure front to back for the base and add the depth of that groove, which is about 3/8 of an inch, and then I could go through and cut all my pieces. At this point, all of these are still identical. They're the same width, they're the same height. It just makes life so much easier. I could cut all the backers and all the bases based off these measurements. Like I said, I have made many drawers before, especially when I first started out. They were not always the same, and you could change the measurements to make everything work. It's not doable. It just makes life so much easier when they're all identical. So I had rough cut these backs out when I cut all of the pieces originally, so I only have to take a little bit off for the backer, and then like I said, the base is 1/2 inch ply, so I could cut all of that down to width. And then I could go cut it to size on the radial arm saw. That's pretty much how this process is going to go when cutting down sheet goods. I usually cut it down to size on the table saw, and then down to final size on the radial arm saw. Using stops, you can see I have the stop set up on the left hand side, and I could cut all of these pieces identically. So the saw throat is not perfect for this. I think it was off by like an inch. Within reason, you can lift up the piece of wood at the end of the cut carefully and get that done. So then you can see the base slides right into those grooves nicely, the backer slides right into the dados, and then I could check to make sure this will fit in the drawer slot before gluing all these up, and they do. I was pretty happy at this point. Everything was working out nicely, and then I could glue all these up. Now I say this every time I have some sort of joint. The more surface area that you can apply glue to, the stronger these joints are going to be. These modern glues are extremely strong. They're stronger than the wood they're being attached to. When a joint breaks apart with these modern glues, it usually pulls the wood away from it. The glue joint doesn't really break, it's the wood that breaks first. So all of those dovetails is what's going to make this so strong with all of that glue, and that's why I put the time and effort into making them. The last thing I want is an email from a customer saying something broke, so that's why I put in the effort to build these properly the first time around, even if it takes longer than other methods. You can see I could attach all that, put glue on all of my pieces, put it together. Now since these are dovetailed and dadoed and all of that, they're usually pretty square attaching them, but I will put a couple brads in the bottom just to hold everything in place. I'll pop it up on my workbench, measure my diagonals, make sure it's square, and once it's square I'll put a couple brads in the back as well, and those are just so as the glue dries everything is held in place. And then once that's done, I put it in there with the draw sides. Like I said, it will dry in place with the drawer slides. So even if this drawer box is a hair off, I make sure it fits, and as it dries in place, that pretty much guarantees that everything will work. So one drawer box I attached the drawer slides to. I didn't do all of them because the slides are going to have to be in a particular position. I just wanted to make sure it would work. Like I said, these are all the same size. You can see when I pull it out, there's no racking side to side, which is going to be the most important thing with these bigger slides. And then I could go through and add the detail to the front. Now I did this a little bit differently than I normally make drawer boxes. I normally make drawer boxes like this, 3/4 inch ply, because that's usually what I have laying around the shop. It's a little bit of overkill, but like I said, it's what I have laying around the shop, so it ends up being cheaper for the customer, and no one ever complained about heavy duty drawers. And then if there's a decorative front, I usually attach a false front. I didn't want to do that with these because they're already so heavy. So what I decided to do was I was going to make the decorative element and go through and cut a rather large piece of material out of it and then attach it to the sides of the drawer box. That will make a little bit more sense when you see where I'm going. But basically I made measurements to calculate for my reveal, which on these I want to be about a 3/16 of an inch. I went through and cut a bunch of strips of plywood because I'm going to be making this decorative edge out of plywood because I could edge band the edges. And then I'm going to cut a rather large, very wide rabbet out of one side. So especially this piece is going to be going on the long top and the long bottom. It's going to look very fragile, which it is, but once it's glued to the drawer box, it's going to be really strong. This method took a little bit more time than just, if you watch the series I made before this with the vanity, it had the same decorative element, and on that one I just attached pieces to the front of the box. But because these are side mounted drawer slides, I couldn't do that. There would be way too much of an overhang of the material because the drawer box is much smaller than the opening. On the other build I did undermount slides so it wasn't as severe, and I could do a false front. And like I said, I did not want to add any more extra weight to these drawer boxes, especially in the front. Didn't want to have to worry about them tipping forward or anything like that. So you'll see the sides are going to be a little bit different than the front, and then once I have those cuts, I could go ahead and remove the excess material. You can see I have it lined up in the saw. These pieces on the side, there's more of a gap on the edge because they're further away from the front of the drawer box. And like I said, this will make more sense once you see what they look like mounted on the drawers. But I had all this plywood laying around. When I'm doing a built-in like this, there's tons of leftover scrap pieces, off measurements and whatnot. So this was a nice way to use up that material, and it wasn't that much added extra effort than just attaching pieces to the side. So once I have that groove, you can see it's pretty simplistic. Just taking a large chunk out of the back side, and then it lays right on the front. It's about a 1/4 inch up top, so it will leave that perfect decorative touch. And then the sides basically are the way they are. So in the beginning, you could see I measured how much gap was between the top and the bottom of the drawer box, as well as the side, according to the face frame, and that's how I measured the offset. So I think on the sides from the edge of the box, I was a little over a 1/2 inch away from the face frame, so that's how I dictated how much I cut. It was about a 1/2 inch material was left on the back side, and then the top and bottom, it was much less, so I think I only left about a 1/4 of an inch of that material. And then I could just go through and mark all of these and cut them down to size. So like I said, it was a little bit more effort cutting all of that plywood. It really wasn't that terrible, and it gave me the exact look I wanted without adding more weight, and you'll see how it's a little bit easier to attach these as well. So this is what that one drawer box looks like with all of that in place. I'm using pennies as my offset, and then I'm also taking a little bit more material off, because like I said, these edges will be edge banded. That usually adds about a 1/16 of an inch material to it. So you will notice before I edge band all these, the gap, the reveal looks a little bit bigger. I also calculated I needed my slides to be about 3/8 of an inch back. So once I had all of those calculations, I could go through and permanently attach all of these slides, knowing that that was how far they had to be set back, which was the easiest way to determine that was to mock up one of the drawers, which I did. So then for attaching these, I made 2 jigs. You could see this one dictates how far back the slide's going to go, and then the piece of plywood on the bottom dictates how high up it's going to go. These heavy-duty slides have very specific mounting instructions, so I stuck to those, which is what that was. And then the bracket that goes on the side, I also made another jig. Very simple. It's just an L cut out of a piece of plywood, and then I have 2 stops on the front and the top, so that I can mount all of these in the exact perfect orientation. For the drawer boxes, I had to make 2 of those jigs, one for the left-hand side, one for the right-hand side. It took all of 5 minutes. It was totally worth it, because then all of those brackets were mounted identically. I didn't even have to measure on the sides. So then there that is in place, and you could see how all of my pieces will fit. And I'm making sure that I have, like I said, the reveals are a little bit on the heavy side at this point, because I know I'm going to be edge banding these. And then this is just showing how I permanently attach the sides. I have the jig on the bottom giving me the proper height. I could pre-drill some screw holes. I usually put these in the holes that slide back and forth for minor adjustments, and I could keep testing my jig in the front as I add screws. These didn't come with screws, so I had to use my own, but I had some laying around the shop. Once that's in place, can double, triple check. Obviously, if this is off a little bit, you could just slide the drawer slide back, but it's easiest to get it accurate the first time. And then on the boxes, same thing. I'm using the jig. I could put the bracket right in place, pre-drill my holes, and attach these. Now once these are in the space, there is screws to permanently attach these brackets to the slides so the drawer boxes don't lift up. But obviously for in the shop, I'm not going to do that yet. They just slide in and out of place. They're a little cumbersome to get in and out of place, but like I said, you pretty much have to use these for larger drawers and wider drawers, or you're eventually your hardware will fail on you if you use regular slides. So you can see how they kind of tilt and slide into place. I could get those in there, and then once I have all these mounted, I could go about attaching the fronts. Now because I don't have the top on yet, the top was bowing a little bit, so I screwed some 2x4s into the top so that the top was true and I could get my reveals accurate. That's another problem with these really wide boxes, Even though they're a little under 36 inches, they still wanted to bow a little bit. So then my pieces, it's really simple. I could attach glue on all of the sides. I'm using cards to shim at this point because, like I said, my reveals are a little bit bigger than a 1/16 of an inch, so the pennies won't work. And then I could just go around and attach all these. It was pretty simple stuff. I cut a bunch of extra of these pieces, so I could just cut them down on the radial arm saw and attach them as I go. So I'm putting the sides on first, and then I could go through, there's the view of all of the sides, and then I could go through and do the tops. So that's one done right there. And at this point I also have to add straps to the front, and it didn't have the hardware till I took this into the space, so in order to open and close these I had to add some straps. So you could see if you're a little off, the nice thing about this design is I could slide this side up a little bit while the other side was true, so I could attach that one solidly. But if your reveals are a little off, the one nice bonus to this side, as you just saw, was I could make micro adjustments, slide that piece up a little bit and attach it that way. So that was a nice part of the effort into this. And same thing for the bottom. So like I said, once you have these pieces cut, it's really easy stuff. And this is plywood, so I don't have to worry about these moving and shifting, which is nice. And then same thing for the bottom. I could take my oversized pieces, mark them, cut them as I go so everything's perfect, and then they're shim and make adjustments in real time there. And then obviously the brads, since this is going to be painted, I wasn't liberal with the brads, but I don't mind using them on painted products, and can easily cover those with putty. And that's basically what all of those look like. So a little bit of a process, but worth it. I didn't get a final view of all those fronts, so a little preview to next week, we'll be building the top. They wanted a thicker top for this to match the window frame molding.